You'd probably agree that part of walking away from an addiction is having self-awareness. But I believe there's more to that piece that isn't being talked about because I've seen it firsthand with myself and with my clients. The usual advice about awareness doesn't just fall short, it can make the addiction worse. So in this video, I'm going to show you an awareness system that you can implement right now to start changing the addiction pattern for good. May Allah reward you for being curious. Let's tie our camel. Okay, so before we jump into this self-awareness system, let's take a look at what we're accustomed to doing or what we've been told, and then compare that to what we do here at Mind Sentry Labs. Let's get into it. So the first thing, that the old way is religious motivation and shaming. This is where you maybe go to an imam or a friend who has knowledge of the Deen and you say, hey, look, I have an addiction to pornography, or maybe it's social media, whatever the case may be. And they tell you, brother, you need to make a istighfar, you need to pray more, you need to be more, sincere. And you're like, oh, I've tried that, I've done that, and I still keep falling into it. And they're like, brother, just got to try harder, read more Quran, make dua, sincere in the night. You got to be crying. And I'm not saying these things are wrong. I'm just saying that, we've been there and we've done that, and it didn't work. And so what ends up happening is we end up feeling shame because we know what we're supposed to do and we know the outcome that it should give us, but we're not getting it. And so we start feeling like there's something wrong with us, or maybe we're not worthy of being Muslim, or maybe this is just a test. And, but if it's a test, how I'm losing this test. So this is something that I think is something more of, we'll look at that with the new way, but I think this is something that can be very harmful. Number two is relying on willpower alone. Willpower is a finite resource. It runs actually on our physical energy, as Baumeister pointed out in his many experiments. And so, we can't rely on this. And this, unfortunately, is what most people do with an addiction, is they rely on willpower. The next thing is relying on app blocking apps. For example, with pornography, you might have a porn blocker, but this is kind of like being an alcoholic and you're spending all day in a bar and they put a big curtain in front of all the drinks. Now, the drinks are behind there, and this is just going to create the urge even more, because what ends up happening is, because you're not addressing the root cause, the porn blocking app itself is triggering the pornography. Even though it's blocking it, it has your brain thinking pornography. And so you'll find a way. Where there's a will, there's a way. You'll find a way to go on another device. Maybe you go on your computer. You have downloaded videos. There's pictures, images. You're going to find a way. And so, again, you're relying on willpower, or you're trying to distract yourself. And that rarely works long term. Next are streaks of shame. Now, this is where you're checking boxes every day. You got through it today, green check. And so this looks like a good thing, and it can be if you do it the new way, which I'm going to show you. But if you do that just on its own, again, you're relying on willpower. Willpower rarely lasts for a long period of time. And so what ends up happening is it's slowly creating this shame. And it's weird because even though you're checking yourself off each day, in the back of your mind, you kind of know you're going to give in. And so that adds more pressure, more stress. And the more stress you get and the more you resist, the more dopamine is firing for release. It's trying to get you to go to the pornography or the sugar or what have you. So that rarely works long term as well. And then once you fail and you relapse or you slip, you got to put a red X, and it feels like starting over. And then the shame just increases even more, because you're like, oh, I made it 5 days, I made it 10 days, and then I gave in, and now I got to start over. And then you're like, oh, the next day you're like, oh, I already slipped, I might as well just do it again. So these rarely work. The next thing is distracting yourself. Now, I've recommended this in the past. There is a little bit of benefit to this, but overall it doesn't work very well, because the type of self-awareness that we need is actually going to help us, which is sitting with these feelings, with the urges. So distracting yourself is really just distracting yourself from the root cause of the addiction. And then the last one is being aware for the sake of being aware. This is probably one of the most detrimental aspects of self-awareness, which I kind of made this whole video about, is because just being aware for the sake of being aware and not having a system can actually make the addiction worse. So, self-awareness without a system is shame disguised as progress. Because what you're doing is, you get triggered and you're like, okay, I just got triggered. Now what do I do? Okay, I'm not going to engage in the ritual, because we usually have rituals that are associated with an addiction. And so you think, well, I'm not going to do that. Let me just go for a walk. And so then you distract yourself, as I mentioned. And this just, again, you're avoiding the root cause of the addiction, of the urges. So what's the new way? So the new way would be, let's see. So the new way is religious-based, sorry, my handwriting, science-driven. So what that means is we're using both the science and the Deen. So it's grounded in the Deen, meaning the Deen verifies the science, not the other way around. And so that we're not using Deen solely as the end all be all total, source of truth for recovery, which can cause shame, but we are using it to ground ourselves. So I'll explain what that means in a moment. Next thing is no willpower. We're not using willpower at all, which is great. Makes things a lot easier. And then after that, we have no blocking apps. Like, oh, Farooq, what's going on, man? No blocking apps? You got me in the bar with no curtain? Well, as you'll see, we're not going to be in the bar at all. Then we have, instead of streaks of shame, we have streaks with tweaks. In other words, you can mark off your green check marks, but with each day that you remain abstinent, you're journaling. You're writing everything down. What made it easier? What made it difficult? How did you get over those difficult parts or points or hurdles? All of which you can learn. There's a whole entire program on this in Sentry Labs. If you're interested, there's a link in the description below. This is where we experiment and we do all kinds of things and find what wins and leave what doesn't. But yeah, having streaks along with context in how you actually got through that day, or even if you slips are no problem. That's part of the journey. But as long as you're documenting why you slipped, what you tried and why it didn't work, and then you come back to the community and we can all go over it together, figure it out. And then that way, once we kind of nail it down and then we find that when we get to that point again, we can get through it because we figured out a solution, then you can keep going. And it's just a matter of, that's just how it works. So I have this system that I put together that works for me, that's kept me in full recovery for years now, but it doesn't always, certain things that I do may not work for you. And so that's the whole point of the Sentry Labs, is that we experiment and try things out so that everybody can benefit, inshallah. So streaks with tweaks. Next one, leaning into the urge. Now this might sound wild, but we'll explain what that is. And that's part of the self-awareness, is you want to turn inward, your attention to your physical sensations. We'll go over that in a second, but we're not going to distract ourselves. We're going to actually lean into the urge. And then we're going to do that. So instead of being aware for the sake of being aware, we're going to be aware using somatic experiencing. And this is a really cool concept by Dr. Peter Levine. So moving on, what's the ideal way of practicing self-awareness? For this, we're going to take a look at Wilhelm Reich's model. This actual concept or visual was put together by Peter Levine. I think it explains it really well. And so basically what this means is, so you can imagine that this stream in the middle, we have this stream. This is your life, basically, your life. Imagine it being your life energy. Way of remembering it is row, row, row your boat gently down the dream. Merrily, 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 life is but a stream. So I didn't misword that. That's a good way to remember it. Just imagine life is energy is flowing. And so what Wilhelm Reich came up with, he's a psychiatrist that came about after Sigmund Freud. He was saying that everyday life and stress and things can be seen as obstacles. So imagine you have these boulders in your life. These are just like everyday stresses and things. And so what it ends up doing is it can affect the current or stream in your life, your energy, your emotions and whatnot. But eventually everything gets back to normal flow. So there's a little hiccup and then you kind of move through it and then you're back to your flow. And so I've mentioned that in previous videos where you want the experience to move through you and then so you can recover. And one of the examples he gives is that of a impala. So an impala, when it's being chased, it has its normal energy flow. But as soon as a cheetah starts chasing it, its flow heightens. So you can imagine that as being, one of these boulders. So things are disrupted. It's at a high stress state because it's being chased. And so if it gets away, it immediately gets back to normal. That stress moves through it. The experience is gone. But here's the thing with trauma. With trauma, you can imagine trauma coming in and it ruptures the stream. So you have this rupture and then what ends up happening is now the flow, no, I want blue. Now the flow is going out. So imagine it going on to the bank. And so, but what this does is it creates this vortex, this powerful vortex. Think of it like a wormhole or a black hole. And so now, rather than this experience, just having these boulders in the way and then you come back to normal, to homeostasis, you kind of get over it. Now there's a permanent rupture on the stream bank. And now you have this pull into this vortex. So now as you go through your day, you're being pulled anytime you have a trigger. So for example, you have shame or whatever the actual traumatic source is for you. Anytime you're triggered or there's something in your life that cues, your nervous system is going to automatically be triggered as if you're back in that moment of when the trauma actually happened. And so this is a case for like PTSD. My dad did 3 tours in Vietnam and he came back with severe PTSD. So there were certain things that would trigger him and he would go full on into a panic attack or even have flashbacks. And so he was, as far as his nervous system was concerned, he was taken back to as if he were there. His body didn't know the difference. And so that's the vortex. He got pulled into this vortex. This doesn't necessarily have to be something extreme like PTSD. You can actually have, it's subjective. You could have been traumatized by a surgery, by an accident, by a fall, a death of a loved one. Anytime that's triggered, we're pulled into this vortex. Now, so what ends up happening is a person could have a response. Maybe they burst out in rage. When there's something triggered, they have rage or anger. They don't know where it's coming from. It's usually something triggered, something that's been suppressed for many years, usually from childhood. And so or the opposite of what people can do is they end up kind of shutting down. And so you can imagine they're trying to avoid this vortex, kind of like going into denial or kind of shutting down. But what this does is it ends up creating a very limited, narrow life, right? Because you have all this stream, but you're just down here because you're trying to stay away from the vortex. I usually think of this as being how addiction is helping us avoid that trauma, but it's limiting us. And if you have an addiction and you're here, if you're still watching, then you're serious about recovering from your addiction, because this really works. But we'll get more into it. But this is how addiction limits your life, because it's pretty much all you think about all the time. And if you're not thinking about the actual engaging with the addiction, you're constantly thinking about not engaging in the addiction. So you're really missing out on a lot of things. It could be procrastination, you're irritable, it affects relationships, all kinds of negative outcomes come from addiction. That's where addiction comes in. What can help with this? Well, the idea is to create an alternate or mirroring vortex. Now, I'm going to try to erase this a little bit. So imagine we have another vortex, but this one's streaming in the opposite direction. So you have this one going this way, this one's going this way, and the negative one, I should have probably drawn the negative one in red, and the blue one is being good, but You get the point. So what ends up happening is, or actually, sorry, let's back that up here. So it goes this way and this one goes this way. So usually you can see in nature, when you have one vortex, you have another vortex. And then something, rather than getting sucked into one, it can actually go in between and move beyond both vortices. That's what we want to do, like emotionally, is how can we still live our life, but move through to the other side and be normal. So basically what we're doing is we're going to find a way to get through this two vortices and still be able to live our life, even though there's the underlying trauma. So how do we do that? The first thing we're going to do is anytime you have an urge, or if you're engaged in something, I think I mentioned this in the last video. If you're studying or doing something that's benign, something that's not stimulating a lot of dopamine, but then you come to a point when you want to take a break, do what I call a break and shake. Instead of just picking up your phone and scrolling or finding some dopaminergic stimuli to engage with, you do a break and shake. You shake your body, you walk around, maybe you hum. What you want to do is have movement. You can even pray Tut Arka, because movement helps to kind of reset the nervous system. Because what ends up happening is it starts compounding and building. You go from one thing to another, to another, to another, to another. And that creates a lot of stress. And then we end up relapsing. We end up going to our addictive substance or behavior for relief. So do a break and shake. And the beautiful thing about working with the nervous system and with self-awareness is it works automatically, because we're not using our brain. We're keeping our head out of it. And it's almost kind of miraculous. It's really amazing. So first thing you're going to do is break and shake. Second thing you're going to do is have physical awareness, or what they call the felt sense. And so with physical awareness is you're going to do a body scan. You're going to start from the feet and you're going to work your way up to your head. And you really want to focus on the sensations. You may have emotions, you may have thoughts going through your head that create emotions, but we want to go beneath the emotions and focus on the actual physical sensations. And then from there, you want to breathe, taking a deep breath, especially if you have any tension or butterflies or weird feelings in your stomach or in your gut. Taking a full deep breath through your nose and out of your mouth can help reset your nervous system. Another thing you want to do is try your hardest to keep your head out of it. Your head might try to come in and think, oh, I'm not feeling anything, or am I doing this right? Or where is this feeling coming from? You want to leave all of that out, leave your head out of it. Try to just really focus on the sensations. So if you feel that you have a tightness across your shoulders, then you want to kind of just lift your shoulders a little bit and relax. You might be tempted to do a big shoulder shrug, but that can be overwhelming to the system. It can actually release too much emotion, too much trapped energy, and cause you to relapse. So you want to do things very gently. This is a very slow, it takes time and patience, but it works like, I don't want to say magic, but it's very, it's amazing how well this works. So we're breathing, focused on the sensations in our body. We're trying to relax them. Just relaxing helps release trapped energy. And then there's another thing you can do, which is self-talk. Once you really start becoming quickly aware of your bodily sensations and you're able to relax and notice them and let them pass through, then you can tell yourself something which is, I think, very powerful, that really got me through some tough urges early on, which is tell yourself that I'm alive and I'm real. And say it out loud. You have to say it out loud. A lot of things that we do, we need to say out loud, because there's just something about hearing it through our own ears rather than hearing it in our mind that makes it more effective. So I like to say, I'm alive and I'm real. Because all of this, what we're doing is we're trying to bring back our awareness of self, because trauma cuts that off. Trauma tries to protect us from something that was overwhelming that we couldn't escape from. And so it's trapped in our body, in our nervous system. And so the more we become aware of our physical presence, our existence, and telling ourselves that we're alive and I'm real, this is a great reminder. And it kind of takes us out of our head, and the addiction will start to loosen its grip, because the whole reason that we have an addiction is because we've lost our sense of self. There's a disconnect, spiritually, mentally. But once we start bringing that attention back to ourself, we can start to heal. And inshallah, the addiction just loses its power just automatically. The next thing is body touch. Again, apologize for the handwriting. This is just where you just pat yourself, different parts of your body. I'm alive, I'm real. And again, I know this, I've said this before. I know it looks kind of corny. It looks like but I'm not going to bust out any crystals or anything, I promise. This just really works. And I know a lot of times we hear something or we see something that's kind of strange or different, but I really invite you to try this. You'll be amazed. And again, you have to have patience. And so as you touch, you say, this is my shoulder, this is my bicep, this is my forearm, this is my chest. You're showing and you're programming your nervous system and your brain that you exist. Because again, big part of trauma is detaching everything. We end up using an addiction to distract ourselves, to, again, stay away from that vortex that's going to take us into a traumatic experience. A good example of this is the fact that when I was first going through it, when I think a couple of my last addictions that over a 30-year period was pornography and music. And so one of the things I would do is I knew I needed to be self-aware, but I was just being self-aware for the sake of being self-aware. And so what ended up happening is I was just constantly trying to distract myself, and I was relying on willpower. These things seem to help for the short term. I think the longest I had gone was like maybe 12 days. But then, as I started learning over the years and I started finding more about this somatic experiencing, I stumbled across Peter Levine, started just deep diving into all his work. And I thought, wow, trauma, I need to focus on resolving trauma. That's where I got more into self-awareness, then self-discovery and all these things. And so now I'm just sharing it with you, inshallah. And so, with that being said, I hope this has been beneficial for you. I'm new at this. I'm starting to do these like presentations. Inshallah, I get better as time goes on, but I'd much rather do it this way, kind of shooting from the hip. But if you found it beneficial, please leave a comment. If you have questions, please join us at our free community for Muslim brothers at Sentry Labs. I put a link in the description. I'll also put a link in the comment, because being there and sharing our story and our journey with each other and, experimenting and, tracking what works and what doesn't work can benefit all of us, inshallah. So till next time, may Allah reward you for being curious. In the next video, I'm going to talk about journaling, which is something that really is powerful when combined with self-awareness. And I'll also maybe share a bit of the Sentry Labs model, the inner kingdom model that we use. I'll have more about that in this video here. Until next time, as-salamu alaykum, jazakallah khair.